This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Your hosts are Seth Jacobson and Patrick Heiler.
Hi, I'm Seth.
And I'm Patrick.
Chapter 3 of The Fires of Heaven, Pale Shadows, and our symbol is the dice. Pale Shadows. Seizing Sidene, Rand channeled, wove flows of air that snatched Natail up from the cushions. The gilded harp tumbled to the dark red tiles as the man was pinned against the wall, immobile from neck to ankles, and his feet half a pace above the floor. I've warned you. Never channel when anyone else is around. Never. Natail tilted his head in that peculiar way he had, as if trying to look at Rand sideways, or watch without being noticed. If she had seen, she would have thought it was you. There was no apology in his voice, no diffidence, but no challenge either. He seemed to think he was offering a reasonable explanation. Besides, you looked thirsty. A court bard should look after his lord's needs. That was one of the small conceits he surrounded himself with. If Rand was the Lord Dragon, then he himself must be a court bard, not a simple gleeman. Feeling disgusted with himself as much as angry at the man, Rand unraveled the weave and let him drop. Manhandling him was like picking a fight with a boy of 10. He could not see the shield that constricted the other man's access to Sidene. It was female work, but he knew it was there. Moving a goblet was about the extent of Natail's ability now. Luckily, the shield had been hidden from female eyes. Natail called the trick inverting. He did not seem to be able to explain it, though. And if she'd seen my face and was suspicious, I was as startled as if that goblet had flown at me by itself. He stuck his pipe between his teeth and sent up furious streams of smoke. She still wouldn't suspect. Settling back onto the cushions, the other man took up the harp again, strumming a line of music that had a devious sound. How could anyone suspect? I do not entirely believe the situation myself. If there was even a touch of bitterness in his voice, Rand could not detect it. He was not entirely sure he believed it either, though he had worked hard enough for it. The man in front of him, Jason Natail, had another name, Asmodean. Idly playing the harp, Asmodean did not look like one of the dreaded Forsaken. He was even moderately handsome. Rand supposed he would be attractive to women. It often seemed strange that evil had left no outward mark. He was one of the Forsaken, and far from trying to kill him, Rand hid what he was from Melaine and everyone else. He needed a teacher.
We get a reference back to, I would say, Eye of the World here a bunch, where he is worried that Melaine is going to see him being taught by Forsaken and think that means he has turned to the shadow.
Right.
And that she's going to try and kill him for that. And that's back to that first statement she made that I think was always a big mistake, where she said, if you turn to the shadow, I will kill you. Like,
I'll kill you myself.
I will take you out.
Yeah.
I'll kill you myself. And so it's one of those things where he's trying to hide the fact that Asmodean's Forsaken, and thereby he has to hide that the entire caravan of peddlers led by Kadir are Dark Friends.
Right.
And so he's doing a lot to make sure that as the Dragon Reborn, he's protecting known Dark Friends because his teacher is one of the Forsaken.
So he's worried that if Kadir or Isandra are discovered as Dark Friends, then everyone they're associated with will also be questioned, and that's a problem for Rand.
Right,
because that
includes
their secret.
Jason Natail.
Yeah, and he's thinking about that here, and he's kind of breaks down for us the reason that he made and hid this plot to lure some of the Forsaken out to the Waste and capture one. And I also kind of wanted to just bring up the point that Rand thinks, at least, I don't know that it's true, but Rand thinks that, like, he set all this up on purpose, lured these people out to the middle of nowhere, or what he thought was the middle of nowhere, or going to be the middle of nowhere, to capture a teacher, and his reasons being that most male channelers aren't trained themselves, and even a false dragon who could channel would probably try to kill him and take his place. So there's only one option.
Taim.
Yeah.
That's yeah. Taim and Logain are sort of the two folks that he could turn to, but he has no idea where they are right now. Well, Logain is stilled, right? So he's useless.
Right.
Until he gets healed. And Taim, as far as we know, or as far as we think at this point, is currently under Demandred's control because he's been freed. And the assumption is being turned to the dark side at this point until he shows up to help teach the Black Tower.
Yeah.
When Rand puts out his the amnesty that he puts out for men who can channel.
Right. Oh, hey, by the way, as the sounds are kicking up behind me, I don't know if my mic is picking this up at all, but there are it's July 4th while we're recording this, which is American Independence Day for those of you who don't know. And so if there are random explosions or music in the background, that's why. Please don't be alarmed.
We're not being shot at.
It is.
It's just
not. I think
it's not skylights though.
Not legal to buy fireworks and set them off within the city limits, but people do it. So
no,
every year for all week. So don't be alarmed.
You know there's going to be fires after this weekend too.
Don't swerve off the highway if you hear what you think is a gunshot. Just.
And then we could get a little bit into Asmodean's head here. He's still thinking of the Dark One as the Great Lord, and we even right before he dies, we see him think in his own head that he always calls the Great One the Dark Lord, which is one of those things that makes me think Asmodean never really fully came over to the light side. He was always just desperate, never converted.
Yeah, no. And we'll see later that I think he believes that no matter what he does, he's doomed. Because he thinks that if he escapes, or even if he could escape, he wouldn't have anywhere to go. He'll be hunted down by his own people, I guess, in quotes, the Shadow Sworn.
Right. And if the light side ever figures out who he is, he's in trouble too.
Right. And he doesn't think that they have any chance of winning, considering the Dragon Reborn's knowledge is basically nil.
Pathetic.
Yeah, literally a shepherd.
Yeah, and he's like, I'm a terrible teacher. I don't know why she made me. I mean, and then he makes that slip up where he's like, I'm a terrible teacher. If there was anyone else, you should get them. And he's like, oh, but there is no one else. Oops. Because once Asmodean says there's no one else, he's like, yeah, that's right. I literally can't find anyone else. You are the only person who is willing to teach me.
Right. A little later in the conversation here, we also see that Rand kind of accuses him of being a terrible teacher, and Asmodean's like, yeah, I told you. But also, he says, you can grasp Sidene every time you try now, and tell one flow from another. You can shield yourself, and the power does what you want it to, which is an enormous improvement from just a month or two ago. When Rand was in Tyr, he didn't know. He would try to reach out to the source, and it would come sometimes and not others.
I just think about him, at the beginning, at the beginning of the Dragon Reborn, when he's in the hills trying to seize the power, and then he ends up nearly shaking the whole place down around them, and wounds the Tinker Woman.
Yeah,
there's a bunch of scenes like that where he can't. He tries to draw on the power, and it either doesn't happen or something unexpected happens. And so we are at a new level, right? Between last book and this book in the last few weeks, he has gone from an unreliable channeler who can only do things in desperation to someone who actually has the ability to control when and what he channels. Now, he still has to learn a bunch of new weaves, but he's no longer, I would say he is past the point where 1 in 4 women die learning to channel.
Yeah, he's gone through channeling sickness and he's survived.
I guess that was a while ago, but I think of it even
or accidentally killing himself as well.
Yeah, Yeah, he's not going to accidentally just draw too much power or accidentally, burn himself out simply because he doesn't understand how to use the power. He's sort of past that danger now.
Yeah.
So a leveling up of Rand.
And then we see here, Asmodean says, how much do you remember of being Lutheran? And Rand says nothing, although that'll change in the future.
Yeah.
And Rand also says, well, if linking the two of us will help you teach me, then why don't we do it? And Asmodean's like, holy shit, kid, you don't know anything.
Right.
Because we can't. And Rand's like, why not? And he's like, I don't know. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, it's why are men generally stronger? Well, we just are, I mean, steroids, but that's a whole...
Right, and Asmodean even goes to the depth, at least, to explain, well, saying a man is stronger in the power than a woman is like saying a man has stronger arms than a woman. Surely there are women who are stronger than some men, but typically this is the way it goes.
Right. Yeah, if you draw out that bell curve, the peak The mean and the standard deviation are significantly lower for women than they are for men in terms of power, even if there is, tails that cross over each other. And you're also going to see the counterbalance to that is that the women can link, and so you can end up with like one woman in control of the power of 13 versus one man with the power of one man.
Right.
And that's I think a consistent theme throughout the books is that the women gain power through cooperation. You have the women's circle, right? Like, how is that not foreshadowing, like women forming circles of the one power?
Oh, wow,
right?
I never had that thought. The women's circle in Emond's Field is not, I mean, they're not actually linked, but...
Yeah. No, but it's totally a parallel, right? The women's circle in Emond's Field and the White Tower have lots and lots of sort of analogs between the two of them. Oh, the other little tidbit that I'm going to throw in here that someone mentioned on the server that I thought was interesting. You know how Perrin's axe is always described as a half-moon axe?
Yeah.
Well, half-moon, moon, wolf, half-moon, half-wolf.
The crescent moon.
Perrin has a half-moon blade because he's half-wolf, and the spike is the other half.
I wonder if he did that intentionally.
Right? So this half-moon blade that he's always carrying around has a lot to do with, like, the half-wolf that Perrin is. The half of his soul that is a wolf. Anyway, I just thought it was a clever little... I don't know if that was intentional or not, but I thought it was a clever little parallel.
I like it. I bet a lot of that stuff is coming out of Two Rivers, because he gave Perrin the half-moon axe, Rand the sword, and Mat a bow and a knife. And I always thought that you give the leader the sword, of course. It's a symbol. It's not just, that's why even in modern military dress uniforms, they still carry the sword because it's a symbol, not because you actually need a sword these days.
Right. Well, and you stand, if you're an actual line soldier, chances are you're going to have a pole arm, because a pole arm is going to do you a lot more good when standing in a line than any sort of short-bladed weapon is going to do you. A bayonet's basically a pole arm, right? It's just you use your rifle as the pole part of the arm.
It's an arm on a pole, so I guess so, yeah. And initially they would have been pretty long, but they still, I think they still have those.
I think so too, yeah.
In any case, we see Rand continue to question Asmodean, what do you know about the Forsaken? And Asmodean's like, oh my god, we've been over this. I guess something I was kind of trying to touch on before, where Asmodean's like, well, you say I'm a bad teacher, but you can do all these things now. We also see Asmodean saying, we've been over this so many times, but here's what I know again.
Again, yeah. About the other Forsaken, which I don't think we need to touch on. We've talked enough about the other Forsaken.
Yeah, and what they're up to.
Other than to say, like, he doesn't really know much.
Less than we do, I think, as readers.
Certainly as rereaders.
And so a lot of this, RJ is kind of giving us his time-lapse recap. Like, lots of things have happened, but we're just going to give you this one scene.
I did notice that Asmodean talked about being in Aradoman, and I wonder if that was... I didn't see anything relevant to that, but I wonder if that's part of why that country is falling apart. Him and Grendel had a lot to do with fucking that place up.
That Asmodean had been there. Probably.
Yeah.
He seems to always sort of attach himself to one of the other Forsaken. He doesn't seem to be like the others in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, he just wanted immortality so he could perfect his music, He's not quite as power-hungry as some of the other Forsaken. Selfish, yes. But he doesn't, want power. He just wants to be left alone so he can play his music.
If I had immortality, the first thing I'd probably do is just, buy some land, make a garden, just relax.
Right.
You don't have anything to worry about.
Except the issue is you pledge your soul to the Dark One to get that immortality, and he requires all sorts of things from you, like killing folks and
bummer. See, that ruins
obeying orders.
You get immortality, but then you have to work forever? Come on.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Jesus.
I'll give you 25 years or something, like a typical...
Right. Do I get a retirement plan here?
Yeah, is there a pension involved?
Percentage? I just spent 3,000 years in stasis. Do I at least get, a few months off? Jesus.
The shadow do 401k matching? What are we talking about here?
What's the health plan? I mean, I know I have immortality, but if I don't have my health and I'm immortal, I don't have anything.
Right. It's not going to be very useful if all my arms are broken or something.
Right. Oh, well, I mean, fortunately, the Dark One's plan does come with a new body guarantee. You wear out your old one, they'll provide you with a brand new one.
All right, I mean, that's pretty good.
Exceptions for Shadow Logoth and Balefire may apply. read the fine print. If the Dark One's locked up in his prison, he won't be able to help you out.
And the part of the conversation here that I was talking about earlier, I want to read because I think it's beautiful in many ways. What do you think of my chances when the last battle comes, Natail? Asmodean hesitated in pulling red and blue striped wool blankets from behind his cushions and looked up at him, head tilted in that sideways manner of his. You found something in the square the day we met here. Forget that, Rand said harshly. There had been 2, not 1. I destroyed it, in any case. He thought Asmodean's shoulders slumped a trifle. Then, the Dark One will consume you alive. As for me, I intend to open my veins the hour I know he is free, if I get the chance. A quick death is better than what I'll find elsewhere. He tossed the blankets aside and sat staring glumly at nothing. Better than going mad, certainly. I'm as subject to that as you now. You broke the bonds that protected me. There was no bitterness in his voice, only hopelessness. What if there was another way to shield you against the taint? Rand demanded. What if it could be removed somehow? Would you still kill yourself then? Asmodean's barked laugh was utterly acid. The shadow take me. You must be beginning to think you really are the bloody creator. We are dead. Both of us. Dead. Are you too blind with pride to see it, or just too thick-witted, you hopeless shepherd? Rand refused to be drawn. Then why not go ahead and end it? He asked in a tight voice. I wasn't too blind to see what you and Lanfear were up to. I wasn't too thick-witted to fool her and trap you. If there's no hope, no chance, not the smallest shred, then why are you still alive? Still not looking at him, Asmodean rubbed the side of his nose. I once saw a man hanging from a cliff, he said slowly. The brink was crumbling under his fingers, and the only thing near enough to grasp was a tuft of grass, a few long blades with roots barely clinging to the rock, the only chance he had of climbing back up the cliff. So he grabbed it. His abrupt chuckle held no mirth. He had to know it would pull free. Did you save him? Rand asked, but Asmodean did not answer. As Rand started for the doorway, the sounds of the March of Death began again behind him. I already talked about this a couple of minutes ago, but Rand missed the point totally. Did you save him? That's not the point of the story. The point is that a desperate man will grasp any possible hope of survival, and that's what Asmodean is doing to Rand.
Even when he knows is going to fail.
Yeah. He's like, I'm sure you won't win, but
yeah,
it's my only chance.
No, he's wrong. He is right that he's not going to survive till Rand wins.
Yeah, that is true.
So he thinks the only hope, he referenced that thing that Rand destroyed, are the Choden Call. The Terangrial gives you access to the Choden Call.
But Rand lied.
And so
he didn't destroy
Rand
it.
lies. No. Yeah, he didn't. But Asmodean sees that as his only hope.
Right, of defeating the Dark One one-on-one. The only way you're going to be able to do that is with the Choden Call.
Yeah.
If you don't have them, then it's over.
I also notice here Rand is really starting to think about cleansing the source in a realistic way for the first time. He's really like, okay, I know that that the Dark One is able to divert the taint from Asmodean, and I was able to cut him off from that, and now he's susceptible to it. So I know there's a way to divert the taint. I know there's got to be a way.
And in the same conversation as talking about the Choden Call and how powerful they are.
Totally. Definitely great foreshadowing for the cleansing here. Is that like, there's got to be a way to cleanse the taint. If only I had something really powerful like the Choden Call.
Yeah, and
must be a way to cleanse the taint.
I do love how the narration leaves some of that stuff out. Like, you never see in Rand's mind, you never see his thoughts about tricking Lanfear into and capturing Asmodean. You never see his plan, but you only see it executed. And
he tells Lanfear that that's what his plan was.
Well, yeah. And in the same vein, you never see Rand planning the cleansing, really, as much as executing a plan that he already made.
Yeah, you rarely ever see Rand make any plans. You just see him do stuff. You see him insane in his head, but he doesn't, like, plan stuff out for us to see.
Right.
It's always, it's just as surprising to us, especially in the later books when Rand's a little insane and he tends to be a little more impulsive. But yeah, he does. Jordan has Rand doing things that you wouldn't expect deliberately, and he doesn't tell you what they are.
We do know it's Rand's intent to do what nobody expects.
Yeah.
He's mumbling to himself about it all the time.
I like this line. What if there was another way to shield against the taint? Rand demanded. What if it could be removed somehow? Would you still kill yourself then? And then Asmodean just laughs and says, we're dead, both of us. Like,
it's already
why are you
over.
even talking about this? Yeah, it's already over. There's no point. So, but Rand is thinking about it. And then I think the next thing I have is the perspective switch to Mat.
Yeah.
And we didn't talk about the header was the dice, because we get a Mat perspective.
Yeah, Rand has just the real short perspective here.
Yeah.
He starts walking. He lays a trap around the room, which I assume Asmodean knows is there, that will kill any male channeler that tries to pass through it.
Right. Yeah, it's basically a prison for Asmodean to make sure he doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah. He's walking away with Adelin, who's I see as like a high-ranking general amongst the maidens. She's around later. But she's an older woman that doesn't appear to be a fighter, but she's a maiden.
You notice all the maidens are getting married?
Yeah, and as they're walking away, Rand says, "Where's Joind?" Who's a woman that's typically there, apparently. And Rand asks, "Where's Joind? I thought she was with you earlier. Has she taken ill?" And the response he gets is, "In a way she has. She had been talking to herself all day, and not an hour ago. She went off to lay a bridal wreath at the feet of Garan, of the Jerome Goshen." And we find out that not only did she put down her spears to marry a man, which is exceptionally strange to them, but she also married a man who his clan has a blood feud with hers. So this is like a thing that does not happen.
Right. Well, there's the Peace of Erudian now, and his Tavernus is having all sorts of maidens, way more maidens than normal, are getting married, and that's all Rand's Tavernus.
Yeah. It made me think about that in terms of Aviendha also, doing something that she doesn't really want to do, in falling in love with Rand.
Sure. Yeah, well, that's why she hates him. She loves him. Yeah. And she hates him for that. Because it dishonors her to love him.
I noticed later, I gotta say, we're gonna talk about this in a couple of minutes, but we find out Aviendha asked for punishment for lying twice in a day. One was that she's holding those flowers that Rand sent to her, but she tells Egwene that, "Oh, I picked them for you," when she sees her holding them. And the other one, I think, is when she tells Rand that she hates him. It's not true.
Yeah. I'm going to agree with you on that.
I think.
Yeah.
Those are the two lies.
I agree with that, yeah.
Yeah, because she can't have him? Or she believes she can't have him?
Well, because she believes that he's Elaine's, and so she's violating her friendship, her near sister friendship with Elaine to be in love with him. Right. And also, there's the whole going through the rings thing that, like, we figured out that she probably saw that she's destined to fall in love with Rand, and, like, she doesn't quite love him yet, and she hates him because she's destined to fall in love with him because it violates her Jito.
She hates her destiny.
Yeah, basically. But she loves him. And she's unlike Min, who hates who's totally, she's like, well, no point in fighting, it's an arranged marriage, and I guess I might as well like it. Besides, he's tall and cute, whatever. Meanwhile, and she's like, I'm just gonna go for it. Whereas Aviendha's like, no, I am not gonna give in to fate, because she's already committed to saving Rand for Elaine, and then she realizes after making that commitment that she's destined to end up with him, and it's like, oh no, what have I done? I'm stuck. She's, that's where she says she has two obligations. Killing herself would free her from one, killing Rand would free her from the other, but each one violates the other, which is her obligation, I want to think, to like being a wise one and
right,
the future, and then the other one is her commitment to Elaine.
When we see Mat, so we see him walking around the edge of a dried-up fountain, singing Dance with Jack of the Shadows.
One of my favorite songs from the Wheel of Time.
I'll read a little bit here, just so we can kind of enter the scene and see what kind of mindset Mat's in. The air felt cool after the day's heat, and he thought briefly of buttoning up his fine green silk coat with golden embroidery. But the drink the Aiel called usquai had put a buzz in his head like giant flies, and the thought flittered away. The white stone figures of 3 women stood on a platform in the dusty basin, 20 feet tall and unclothed. Each had been made with one hand upraised, the other holding a huge stone jar tilted over her shoulder for water to pour from. But one was missing her head and upraised hand, and on another the jar was a shattered ruin. And we find out he's playing a game with a bunch of Aielmen where you throw something up into the air. Well, you get drunk, and then you throw something up into the air, and you got to hit it with a knife, throw with a throwing knife.
You've got to be careful what's on the other side of that field to make sure you're not like just throwing knives into like random tents. But yeah, they're drinking a lot of whiskey and just basically betting on whatever. I mean, Matt, he makes money. That's what he does. He plays games and makes money when he doesn't have anything else to do.
Oh, here it was. The game was to take a drink, then try to hit a target thrown into the air with a knife. None of Kadir's men and few of the Aiel would dice with him, not when he won as often as he did, and they did not play cards. Knife throwing was supposed to be different, especially with usquai added in.
But I'm guessing the usquai just makes Matt's luck take over.
Maybe. It just randomizes everything, which is to his benefit.
Exactly. And as we see, the blindfold helps even more.
Yeah. I'll read a little bit more. I didn't mark this, but it's a cute scene.
Sure.
Corman, one of the Aiel on the coping, looked up at him as he cut off singing. A white scar slanted across his nose. "You're nearly as good with knives as you are with dice, Matrim Cawthon. Shall we call it an end? The light's failing." "There's plenty of light." Matt squinted at the sky. Pale shadows covered everything here in the valley of Ruidian, but the sky was still light enough to see against, at least. "My grandmother could make the throw in this. I could make it blindfolded." Genric, the other squatting Aiel, peered around the onlookers. "Are there women here?" Built like a bear, he considered himself a wit. "The only time a man talks like that is when there are women to impress." The maiden scattered through the crowd laughed as hard as anyone else, and maybe harder. "You think I can't?" Matt muttered. And then he pulls off his scarf and ties it around his face.
Which is interesting, because he's always really careful about hiding the scar on his neck.
I think he's
Must
really
be
drunk.
really drunk. Yeah. That's how you know he's drunk. He's letting people see his scar.
Oh, yeah, we see this here. He thinks, "I'm juicier than a fiddler's whelp." I don't know what that means, but drunk is what I think.
Juiced, when you're juiced up,
juicier than a fiddler's whelp? I don't know.
I mean, who the fuck knows? I really like this quote where he says, someone says, "He's got the Dark One's luck," and he says, "Luck is a horse to ride like any other." No matter where it came from. Not that he knew where his luck came from. He only tried to ride it as best he could. And that just, with Matt as such a horse guy, he's such a horse rider, to him using that analogy of riding his luck like a horse. Of course, he's good at it. That's what he does. He rides horses. And
it's a good representation of him, that he doesn't really care where it comes from. What matters is that it works. Understanding it isn't really important.
That's sort of the Loki, the chaotic good aspect of him.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, it's chaos, but I just use it. I don't really care what happened, where it comes from. I just, do good things with it.
Oh, and then of course Matt says that luck is a horse to ride like any other, and someone says, "What was that you just said, Matrim Cawthon?" Yeah. And we see it in the old tongue, Senesovia, Cabadoned Eind Dovinia. Sorry for my butchery, although I know nobody really knows how to pronounce this stuff.
Luck is a horse to ride like any other. So we're still seeing those old tongue quotes pop out. He's starting to get a little control of them, but not totally. Sort of slowly integrating the memories into his own until they become his own memories. Which, by the way, again, the contrast between Matt, who's acquiring memories from other people, and Rand, who's acquiring memories from somebody else. And Matt has no problems with going insane. He just integrates those memories into his own and just treats them like, yeah, I kind of remember doing that, even if it wasn't him. Whereas Rand has this whole other personality that he develops, because the personality is madness.
I have a bit to read on that at the end of this scene here.
Sure.
Corman put a foot on the piece of wood to wrench Mat's knife free and brought it back to him. Sometime again, maybe, Matcham Cawthon. Someday. That was the Aiel way of saying never, when they did not really want to say it right out. Mat nodded as he slipped the blade back into one of the sheaths inside his sleeve. It was the same as the time he had rolled 6 sixes 23 times in a row. He could hardly blame them. Being lucky was not all it was made out. He noted with a bit of envy that neither Aiel staggered in the slightest as they joined the departing crowd. Scrubbing a hand through his hair, Mat sat down heavily on the coping. The memories that had once cluttered his head like raisins in a cake now blended with his own. In one part of his mind, he knew he had been born in the Two Rivers 20 years before, but he could remember clearly leading the flanking attack that turned the Trollocs at Megond, and dancing in the court of Termenduin, and 100 other things, 1,000, mostly battles. He remembered dying more times than he wanted to think of. No seams between lives anymore. He could not tell his memories from the others unless he concentrated. Reaching behind him, he set his wide-brimmed hat on his head and fished the odd spear across his knees. Instead of an ordinary spearhead, it had what looked like a 2-foot sword blade, marked with a pair of ravens. Lan said that blade had been made with the One Power during the War of Shadow, the War of the Power. The warder claimed it would never need sharpening, and never break. Mat thought he would not trust that unless he had to. It might have lasted 3,000 years, but he had little trust of the power. Cursive script ran along the black haft, punctuated at either end with another raven, inlaid in some metal even darker than the wood, in the old tongue, but he could read it now, of course. Thus is our treaty written, thus is agreement made. Thought is the arrow of time, memory never fades. What was asked is given, the price is paid.
He asked for a way out, and that's what the spear is.
Yep, a key.
Yeah, the key.
One way down the wide street, half a mile off, was a square that would have been called large in most cities. The Aiel traders were gone for the night, but the pavilion still stood, made of the same grayish-brown wool used for Aiel tents. Hundreds of traders had come to Ruidian from every part of the waste, for the biggest fair the Aiel had ever seen, and more arrived every day. The traders had been among the first to actually start living in the city. Mat did not really want to look the other way, toward the great plaza. He could make out the shapes of Qadir's wagons, awaiting more loading tomorrow. What appeared to be a twisted redstone doorframe had been heaved into one that afternoon. Melaine had just taken particular care to see it lashed firmly in place, just as she wanted. I thought that was important to include. Just in exactly the right place.
Let's foreshadow the end of this book with Melaine going through the redstone doorframe.
She needs it to be placed exactly.
Exactly. Because she needs it to match the vision. Because she needs it to be there so she can take out Lanfear. Yeah, no, this is a wonderful foreshadowing in the beginning of this book. One thing I've seen more and more of as we've been doing this podcast is how much, yes, Jordan was able to foreshadow books ahead of time, but he does a lot of foreshadowing in the first few chapters of his books for the end of the book.
Yeah, I never really thought of it, but yeah.
They're like, now that we're starting this book off, and he knows how Moraine's going to die, he can go back and, like, when he was writing this book, put that foreshadowing in the beginning. And it's very effective. Very effective. Because the book sort of came out as a whole, right? So, he knew when writing this scene how the book was going to end. Or when the editors were going back through, this was obviously there.
Oh, yeah.
As foreshadowing,
it's purposeful. And then, of course, as he's walking away, he meets Melindra, who strikes up a conversation with him.
Yeah, she really seems very interested in him for some reason. Maybe because she's a dark friend. Dark friend alert.
Yep.
Yeah, and she's the one who wrote the note to Qadir and slipped it under his door.
Oh. Wait, what? Which note?
Oh, he received a note basically saying you're not alone. Can't remember what else it says. Others have been chosen or something like that. And he was like, oh, code word chosen, right? Like, clearly this is a dark friend.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was her note slipped to him And he noted that it seemed to be, it had to have come from one of the Aiel, dark friends.
Right.
And that's Melindra.
And I'd say I don't think I'll read this part, but she just says, can you do that every time? She's very impressed with his knife work or whatever. And he says, yeah, most of the time. And she gives her sept, but not her clan, because she's Shido. But she left to stay near Ruidian with the other maidens.
The Shido are such the Slytherin of the Wheel of Time. It's like, yeah, they're full of bad guys. Like, there's just no one in Shido no Shido ever redeems themselves, right? It's like dicks, people who abuse other people, and dark friends.
Right. But she's in great shape and really pretty, and he's like, hey, thanks for the compliments, and gives her one of his winnings, which is a pretty piece of jewelry that was won while gambling. And Melinda...
She's like, oh, thanks for the regard gift. And he's like, the what?
Oh, yeah, I think she just says, here it is. Very fine work, she said, holding it up. I accept your offer, she said, and your eyes are pretty too. Because Mat says, these will go good with your eyes, or this will go good with your eyes. And she says, well, your eyes are really pretty too. But he only thinks offer. What offer? Whatever. Moving forward.
I think you have pretty eyes is the last thing she says to him after he kills her.
So sad.
She does really like his eyes. Yeah.
I was really bummed about that. She also asks him a couple of questions, or she says some things like, oh, the other maidens have told me about you. I heard that you're near brother to Randall Thor. And he's like, yeah, something like that. And of course, she's there
That's part of why she wants to be
assassinate one of them.
Yeah.
Or both.
Or get information, I think.
Yeah, I mean, she tries to kill him.
Yeah, and she tries to kill him when he references the attack on Caemlyn. And she tries to kill him with a dagger from Ilion. So there's some debate as to whether or not she worked for Samuel in Ilion, because she had his dagger.
Right.
And was an informant for him, or whether she was working for Ravine, because they mentioned the attack on Caemlyn, and the dagger was an attempt to frame Samuel and set Rand on a path to attacking him.
That sounds more likely. Why would Samuel give her a dagger? And the Aiel won't even buy Wetlander steel. They think theirs is superior. And it probably is. They won't buy knives or weapons from the Wetlanders when the peddlers come.
I thought they did.
I don't think so.
Because I thought metal was hard to get in the Waste.
I don't know. I honestly can't say where I'm remembering that from exactly, but that they are disinterested in the weapons. They buy the books and other things, but they won't buy.
Right. Maybe they just buy raw steel, but not the.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in any case, why would you don't have to give a maiden a dagger? She's already got plenty of weapons.
Right. Yeah.
Why would she have something from Ilion? It's too obvious,
Right. It seems like a frame job. So that's what makes me think it was Ravine.
Yeah, she didn't need to be given the knife.
Yeah. And I have to wonder if maybe there was some compulsion, just the way she reacted instantly to the news. But that's, again, things we'll never know. We can talk about that when we actually get to that scene later on in the book.
Yeah. Here, Mat excuses himself because he sees Rand walking with the maidens, and...
You mean Lewis Theron?
Yeah. Oh, there is that part, which I did mark to read. I almost missed that. Mat excuses himself, runs off, and is calling to Rand. Rand? The other man walked on with his encircling escort. Rand? Rand was not even 10 paces away, but he did not waver. Some of the maidens looked back, but not Rand. Mat felt cold suddenly. It had nothing to do with the onset of night. He wet his lips and spoke again. Not a shout. Lewis Theron? Rand turned around. Mat almost wished he had not. For a time, they only looked at one another in the twilight. Mat hesitated about going closer. He tried telling himself it was because of the maidens. Adelin had been one of those who had taught him the so-called game Maiden's Kiss, that he was never likely to forget, or play again, if he had any say in it. And he could feel Anila's gaze, like an auger boring into his skull. Who would have expected a woman to go up like an oil lantern thrown on a fire just because you told her she was the prettiest little flower you had ever seen? And she's referenced earlier when Rand is walking out from his room with Asmodean, and he's looking at the maidens, and we just see a description of each of them, and they're all, you know, like almost as tall as Rand and stuff. Like all these women are like 6 something, and except for this one maiden that's standing with them, who's, he says, is maybe as tall as Egwene, who's like 5'2". So she's super sensitive about being called little or short or.
Oh, okay.
But also,
right,
you know,
that makes sense.
These Aiel warrior women might not appreciate being essentially, I don't want to say catcalled, but, you know, it's like, oh, aren't you a pretty little flower? And she's like, I will skin you alive, you little shit.
Timber agrees.
But Matt starts talking about saying, like, listen, think I might get going, you know? We got you here, everything's cool. I might go home, or maybe, I don't know.
How creepy is it that Rand responds to Lewis Theron before Rand?
The madness
He's going
is there.
insane. Yeah.
It has been, as we've been arguing. Some people seem to disagree with us, but
he is halfway mad as it is, and he's barely holding on. And don't forget that time compresses quite a bit. So, you know, even though it seems like he's had a lot of time to start going mad, even though he descends into madness pretty quickly from here on out, like, we're not, even though we're less than halfway through the series, we're far more than halfway through the time in which Rand has been channeling.
Right.
You know, I have to wonder if maybe the jump in time when he went through the Portal Stone was necessary so he didn't go insane too soon.
I don't know, maybe. But we do also know that each person's different. Some people last a little longer before they go insane. Some men last longer than others, basically.
Yeah. There doesn't appear to be any specific thing that makes you last longer. It just happens. It seems random.
And of course, I think whenever we learn that, we see Tame used as an example. Like, he's been channeling for years and he hasn't gone insane yet. But that's suspect because he might have help.
Yeah. I wonder if perhaps Mazrim Tame was insane until he was captured by the Dark One and was possibly cleansed of the taint and given protection, so that when he showed up to deal with Rand, at that point, obviously, he was a Dark Friend, so he had the protection, so he wasn't going to go any more insane. But he just seems totally stone cold sane. Evil. But I wonder if perhaps all the taint that he'd gathered up was somehow stripped away from him in Shale Ghul.
I mean, we know it can be done.
Yeah. He could have been very insane when he declared himself the Dragon Reborn, and only became more sane once he was recruited by Demandred. Just a thought.
Yeah.
That maybe his insanity was thinking he was the Dragon Reborn.
I like it. Matt says, I think maybe when Kadir goes with his wagons, I might go with them. And Rand says, well... Oh, and Matt also asks, you won't try to stop me from leaving? And Rand says, I don't try to tell you where to come or go, Matt. Rand said wearily. The wheel weaves the pattern, not me, and the wheel weaves as the wheel wills. For all the world, like a bloody Aes Sedai. But Rand's right. He's like, we don't really have a choice on the matter, but, you know, go ahead, try. If you want to go, try.
He's like, I'm Ta'Veren. I have less choice than most people. I do what I have to, basically.
Yeah.
And you will, too. The wheel's going to pull you into whatever pattern it wants you. You can try and leave. I'm not going to do anything to stop you, but I'm guessing things will arrange themselves to keep you here.
Yeah. And Rand does also mention, don't trust Kadir, Matt. In some ways, he's about as dangerous a man as you ever met. Don't trust him an inch, or you might get your throat slit.
Which is as far as Rand can go in saying this guy's a Dark Friend without actually saying he's a Dark Friend, because he doesn't want to say he's a Dark Friend.
He also says, I should have just finished, but he also says this is important. And you and I wouldn't be the only ones to regret that. That the world needs you.
I wouldn't trust Kadir if he was tied in a sack. He knows. But yeah, and then we get his first question. Now that he's been told that he will marry the daughter of the Nine Moons, whenever he starts being attracted to a woman, he starts asking her, are you the daughter of the Nine Moons?
No.
Does that mean anything to you? No? Okay, cool. Then we can go out.
After that, I just have the readout.
Yeah, go for it.
It was supposed to be a grand thing. All the Ta'veren Mat had ever been able to learn about had been men like Arthur Hawkwing, or women like Mabriam and Shareed, who, stories said, had founded the Compact of the 10 Nations after the breaking. But none of the stories told what happened when one of the Ta'veren was close to another as strong as Rand. It was like being a leaf in a whirlpool. Melindra stopped beside him and handed him his spear and a heavy, coarse-woven sack that clinked. "I put your winnings in this for you." She was taller than he was, by a good 2 inches. He glanced after Rand. "I had heard you were near brother to Rand al'Thor." "In a manner of speaking," he said dryly. "It does not matter," she said dismissively, and concentrated her gaze on him, fists on her hips. "You attracted my interest, Mat Cauthon, before you gave me a regard gift. Not that I will give up the spear for you, of course, but I have had my eye on you for days. You have a smile like a boy about to do mischief. I like that. And those eyes." In the failing light, her grin was slow and wide and warm. "I do like your eyes." Mat tugged his hat straight, though it had not been crooked. From pursuer to pursued, in the blink of an eye. It could happen like that with Aiel women, especially maidens. "Does Daughter of the 9 Moons mean anything to you?" It was a question he asked women sometimes. The wrong answer would send him out of Ruidian tonight if he had to try walking out of the waste. "Nothing," she said, "but there are things I like to do by moonlight." Putting an arm around his shoulder, she took off his hat and began to whisper in his ear. In no time at all, he was grinning even more widely than she. "Does Daughter of the 9 Moons mean anything to you?" She said, "No, but moonlight sounds nice, babe."
And then, you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna... Okay, I'm good.
And then Mat's cartoonish grin widens his face.
Right.
Gosh, we were talking before, though, about how these chapters might be a little short. I think you're totally right, but there are some fun things in here that, this is going to sound silly, but reminded me how much I love this series and how much I love Robert Jordan's writing.
In these chapters?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a point, and I'll talk about it when we get there, but when Rand and Asmodean are talking, and Rand says, well, if you really believe it's hopeless and you're really going to kill yourself when the Dark One breaks free, then why don't you do it right now if you think my cause is so hopeless? And Asmodean tells that story about a man falling off a cliff. And he grabbed onto a tuft of grass, and he knew that there was no hope. Like, the grass isn't going to pull you up, man. But he grabbed the grass anyway, and Rand is like, "Well, did you save him?" And Asmodean just stares at him.
He doesn't answer. He's like, "Why would I?"
That's not the reason I told that story. You're missing the point.
Does it have to do with the water? There was a puddle in that joke, so I mean, clearly the water's the most important thing. So I just don't get it. Yeah. No, there's definitely a miscommunication going on there.
So actually, I was sitting on the porch with Julia while I was reading that, and I read it to her, even though she has no idea what's going on, because I just thought it was so iconic of this series.
It's Jason Natale's, Asmodean's, I think, signature line.
Yeah.
And motivation.
It's definitely his most memorable line, and especially considering he dies, like, pretty soon. He's assassinated shortly after this part that, he doesn't have a lot of lines in general.
No, it's for as important as he is, he's not around a whole lot. He manages to make it a little bit longer than Moraine, I suppose. Or Lanfear. Well, I guess they're technically still alive. But you know what I mean. He's in the story just a couple of... he dies in the chapter after Lanfear and Moraine disappear.
Yeah.
We're a couple of months away from SpoilerCon. It's starting to get real exciting. Plans are coming together. Things are being finalized. Yeah. We're no longer selling tickets. There's all sorts of cool things going on. It turns out we got like a bigger room for a longer part of the day. I don't know. I'm so not up on everything that's going on with the SpoilerCon because we have a planning committee that's doing so much work that I can't even keep up with the amount of work they're doing, much less like Oh, it's insane.
Occasionally someone sends
So
me a
everyone's
message
wild.
and they're just like, hey, could you help with this one specific task? And, yeah, sure. And then they're like, okay, thanks. Yeah. And that's it. Which is great. I believe in them and trust them.
Yeah, I've done a little more than that because I'm dealing with the money and stuff like that and ticket sales. Yeah. And we're going to start selling T-shirts here in a minute to anyone who's coming. We're not going to sell them to people who aren't there, but you can, if you've bought a ticket, you'll get an email with a link to a place to buy a T-shirt. So you'll be able to get SpoilerCon 2019 T-shirts.
Oh, man.
Which are going to look pretty cool.
I want one.
Well, you got to buy it.
You got to buy a
I'll
ticket,
send you a link.
So...
Yeah. You and I, fortunately, don't have to buy tickets to the event. Because if costs run over, we have to pay for it.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?